Desculpa, eu estava vendo aqui um som cruzado. Bom, eu estou imaginando que a gente já está no ar. Eu quero cumprimentar a todos que estão conosco essa tarde para a primeira atividade do ano, letivo de 2021, do programa UFG Doutoral. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos. Eu primeiro tenho que esclarecer que o UFG Doutoral, ele é, obviamente, não só aos nossos alunos de doutorado da nossa instituição, mas alunos de doutorado de outras instituições, obviamente, mas também é um programa que busca a participação de docentes, aqueles engajados na formação doutoral, e, obviamente, que os nossos alunos de mestrado também são muito bem-vindos. Como primeira atividade, ou como um marco das atividades do programa UFG Doutoral para o ano de 2021, nós temos uma satisfação muito grande, né, de contarmos hoje com o Dr. Lucas Zinner, da Universidade de Viena. O Dr. Lucas Zinner, na Universidade de Viena, ele é diretor do Centro de Formação Doutoral, que, de certa forma, é como se fosse a nossa pró-reitoria de pós-graduação, né, as nossas pró-reitorias, pensando nas várias instituições do país. Especificamente sobre o programa UFG Doutoral, este é um programa que foi criado na UFG em 2019 com o objetivo de apoiar a formação doutoral no âmbito dos nossos 42 cursos de doutorado na universidade. Nós temos 42 cursos de doutorado, 59 cursos de mestrado, organizados em 63 programas de pós-graduação stricto sensu. E, obviamente, também temos como parte do nosso sistema de pós-graduação, um conjunto grande de cursos de lato sensu, a pós-graduação lato sensu. Então, o sistema de pós-graduação como um todo na Universidade Federal de Goiás, ele é bastante grande, ele é bastante complexo, e é um sistema que tem crescido e se consolidado a cada ano. Especificamente, em 2019, começamos as discussões em 2018, em 2019, oficialmente lançamos o programa UFG Doutoral, que tem por objetivo buscar uma formação doutoral com caráter mais humanístico, uma formação doutoral mais interdisciplinar e, ao mesmo tempo, também buscar uma maior integração entre os nossos vários cursos de doutorado. E, especificamente, né, o programa UFG Doutoral tem por objetivo propiciar ao aluno de doutorado, mas também aqueles que exercem o papel de orientadores, né, de teses de doutorado, algumas formações adicionais, de tal forma que a gente possa garantir que nós tenhamos, né, do ponto de vista do aluno de doutorado, as devidas competências acadêmicas e profissionais, né, porque esse aluno ele possa, durante o seu processo de doutoramento, adquirir essas competências, mas nós também estamos olhando do lado da orientação, por exemplo, por meio do estímulo às competências de supervisão, né? Eu, agora há pouco, comentava com o Dr. Lucas Zinner que nós, na universidade, nós não somos preparados para essa função de orientação. Aliás, não somos preparados para muitas das nossas atividades, das atividades que exercemos na universidade, né? Por exemplo, eu atualmente estou como pró-reitor de pós-graduação da UFG e não tive, né, um preparo específico para a gestão. Mas aí tem uma coisa interessante. Na universidade, nós contamos, né, por meio, inclusive, por conta dessa formação doutoral que nós recebemos, nós contamos aí com um arsenal de ferramentas que nos permitem exercer várias atividades, né? E é assim que a universidade, a academia, ela prospera, né? E ela desempenha, eu diria, com excelência, né? E em particular, falando das instituições de ensino superior públicas no país, nós desempenhamos com bastante excelência as atividades, né, às quais nos dedicamos. Bom, falei um pouco do programa UFG Doutoral, quero apresentar aqui o Dr. Lucas Zinner, chamar o Dr. Lucas Zinner para o nosso palco, né? E o Dr. Lucas Zinner, ele é matemático, então ele, de certa forma, ele tem dois empregos, por assim dizer, porque ele tem a função dele, a atividade dele como matemático, mas também, especificamente, no âmbito da Universidade de Viena, o Dr. Lucas Zinner, ele dirige o Centro de Formação Doutoral. Dr. Zinner, thanks very much for being with us this afternoon. Thanks very much for accepting our invitation to give this lecture on doctoral education in a changing world. I'm going to translate the questions after your talk. And eu estou aqui falando com o Dr. Lucas Zinner, essa palestra vai ser em inglês. O Dr. Lucas Zinner tem um inglês bastante compreensível, né? Eu acredito que nós não teremos dificuldades em acompanhar a palestra do Dr. Lucas Zinner, que também tem o apoio de slides. E eu estava aqui comentando que as perguntas ao Dr. Zinner, obviamente, elas podem ser feitas, devem ser feitas aqui em português, enfim, podem ser feitas em português, aqui no chat do YouTube, e depois da palestra, uma palestra que deve ter cerca de 40 minutos, eu vou encaminhar as perguntas para o Dr. Zinner, passá-las, enfim, fazer as perguntas para o Dr. Zinner. Bom, mais uma vez, muito obrigado a todos aqueles que estão conosco nessa tarde, né? E que esse evento ele possa ser bastante profícuo, ele possa ser bastante proveitoso para aqueles que, de uma forma ou de outra, estão envolvidos com a formação doutoral. Dr. Zinner, I was saying that I really hope that we have a very productive and very enjoyable afternoon, and I believe that your lecture on doctoral education in a changing world will be very helpful for everyone who is, in a certain way, involved with doctoral education. Once again, Dr. Zinner, thanks very much for accepting our invitation, and I hope that we can soon have you in presence here in Brazil with us discussing doctoral education. Dr. Zinner, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is it working? I will, first of all, let me express my thanks. I feel very honored to be invited to give this talk, and I hope I have something to tell with you what is relevant for you. And I'm really looking forward also to receive your questions, that we have a kind of interesting discussion. I try to be also a little bit provocative in my talk, so that you get also some kind of food for thought. What's going on in doctoral education. I will now try to share my screen with you. Share screen, this one, teilen. So, I don't know exactly if you see it. So the title, is it okay?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. So I decided to change my title a little bit. So it was differently announced. So the idea is, let me see if I can put this away. I decided to call it Doctoral Education in and for a Changing World. Why for a changing world? Because we think that in particular, our PhD graduates will play or should play a major role I would say, drastically to save the planet. And I added a question: is the doctoral education as it is still fit for purpose? So the topics I want to address in my presentation is a little bit of history. So where did we start from? Clearly, global challenges need global answers. I would like to introduce the term modern doctorate, although this is not really defined as such. We'll talk about some trends and issues, the skills agenda, which is really becoming dominant in the discussion about doctoral education. And then I would like to close with some reflections on possible future development when it comes to doctoral education. So there are some interesting projects going on, I would say globally, and I will give you a little bit a hint on what's going on in this respect. So let me start with a with a quote from the OECD in a recent paper published in 2018, and let me read it. In the face of an increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, education can make, and I would say must make, the difference as to whether the people embrace the challenges they are confronted with, or whether we all are finally defeated by them. And in an area characterized by the explosion of scientific knowledge, it is not only that the world is changing with exponential speed, but it's also the amount of knowledge, the amount of papers produced is exponentially growing. So by the explosion of the scientific knowledge and the growing array of complex societal problems, it is appropriate that the curricula, the program designs on all the different levels should be continued to evolve, perhaps in a quite radical ways. And I think this has to be in particular true for doctoral education. Giving you a little bit of a history of the PhD. So the PhD is actually not that old. It started in the early 19th century in Berlin with a reform initiated by Wilhelm von Humboldt. It was taken up at Sorbonne University a year later. But if you look then further, took till the 1848 that it started in Australia. At the end of the 19th century in South Africa, it was Yale in 1861. I confess I didn't get the right figures maybe from Brazil, but I was reading that there were some PhDs awarded in the 1930s, but the system really boosted in the 1960s as far as I understood it. And in China, for instance, it's not older than not even 40 years old. So you see that it's rather a young enterprise. Also Oxford, the UK, started just 100 years ago with the PhD. And if you look now what is going on globally with the PhD, they call it the production of PhDs, and you look where they are coming from, it's still Western Europe and North America, which plays a major part. It's Eastern Europe and Russia. But if you look at the list, the top 6 countries when it comes to the production of PhDs, and the first place, United States, but number 6 already is Brazil. So you see that the Brazil, the universities in Brazil play already a major role when it comes to the production of PhD candidates globally. And if you look at the figures, I didn't find a figure for 2004, but if you compare 2008 to 2017, the numbers doubled, which makes it also quite obvious that the system we had in place 10, 15 years ago might not function anymore in a way. If you look at the numbers of China, they have already they are already now on the same level as the US, and they started just with a handful of PhD candidates in the 1980s. So the production of PhD is really massive, and the same is somehow true for the production of papers. It's increasing, and these are just 2 figures showing you where you are with respect to in relation to other countries. So you are contributing quite significantly to the knowledge of the world. And in particular, if you look on the graphs on the right side, you see that also with respect to collaborations, you're doing much better, so to say, or you're much better connected internationally. This is one of the features of doctoral education as well, than, for instance, what is going on in Russia or in China. So PhDs as such, I would say, is a global phenomenon. And this is why it should be relevant, and I think of the audience, for you as a researcher, you as a supervisor, you as an academic leader, but also for you as a PhD candidate or a PhD student, as you like. You should understand that you're part of a global system. I would like to have a second quote here from Susan Porter. This is in a book called The Future of Doctoral Research, which was just published about 3 weeks ago. And she, Susan Porter, is from the University of British Columbia, and they have a special program called the Public Scholarship, where they try to engage students also with more with the public, so to say, when they do their research. So what she's saying is that the changes we are experiencing as a society and as a planet over the past few decades reach into every aspect of our existence. I would say it has never been as dramatic as at the moment. And in many ways, the problems facing us has never been more urgent, more complex. And then she says that the doctoral graduates of this century are entering a future marked by planetary distress, increasing inequities, and the rise of populism and post-truth public discourses. And you can tell the story in Brazil, and we can also tell the stories about the post-truth when it comes to politics in Europe as well, unfortunately. So on a personal scale, our graduates, you the PhD candidates who are listening, you will likely undertake multiple careers in the diversity of workplaces. You will engage in wide varieties of intellectual, strategic, managerial work. You are facing a very unknown future. This is somehow inherent to the future, that it's unknown, but this is what we should make you fit for, to face the unknown, I would say. So the question I would like to ask is, are we preparing our PhD students, our PhD candidates for this future? A little bit provocative, if you do, we can also say if we do, whatever you always did, you will get what you've always got. So, and if we agree that we are facing a quite rapidly changing world, we have to think how we should adapt doctoral education. Let me nevertheless go back to Wilhelm von Humboldt. I mentioned him already. He started the reform in Germany, and all the doctoral education is more or less built on his idea to train, to educate an adult with respect to research, but also as a person. And the history behind this reform, which took place in the early 19th century, was very much based on the frustration of the Germans that they were defeated by the French. So they decided they have to change their educational system in order to empower the civil society to become innovative, to become creative, to contribute to the knowledge society, so to say, of the 19th century. And the Germans were quite successful in some ways. So what happens now, the good old days when in the times of Humboldt, but also in the time of the 1960s, 1970s, maybe 1980s still, when the professor and usually his, more rarely her, students were working together. Students were like most likely males as well. They are coming from families who were well established, so they work together. And the PhD as university as such, but in particular the PhD was a little bit of an elite program. Nowadays we see really massification in higher education. And in particular, if you remember the numbers I just showed you, in particular also with respect to doctoral education, we see a huge growth increase when it comes to just sheer numbers, sheer statistics. So what happened is, it was of course how to deal with this new environment. And what we see is, in the first place, is a shift from the individual to institutional responsibilities. In the past, it was the supervisor and the supervisee, the supervisor, the mentor, the promoter, as you would like to call him or her, who was treating, hopefully, his PhD candidates in an appropriate way, so he nurtured the talents around him. And it was a question sometimes of luck, if they get the right support. This is not acceptable anymore, so there is an institutional responsibility nowadays to take care of the doctoral candidates. Doesn't mean that the supervisor does not play a major role. The other second step is a realignment of the purpose of doctoral education. It's not anymore just for the career in academia. It's not just the entry ticket for a position at the university where you finally, hopefully, retire as a professor. The purpose of doctoral education is much broader, and we expect our PhD candidates, as well as society, is expecting the impact of the doctorate in a very different way. So people are moving into different careers, yeah, and the minority will stay in academia at the end. So what this yields to a structurization of doctoral education and a collectivization of doctoral education. So it's an institutional approach nowadays, and this is why you have your doctoral college as well. Yeah? This is just a reflection of this shift. As I said, the PhD qualification in the past, 100, 200 years ago, this was the entry ticket to an academic career. And if you're not interested in an academic career, a PhD had little meaning, maybe. Yeah? But now we are recognizing that a real minority, and I would say 20% is rather high. It's a rather high estimate, and of course it depends from country to country. About 20%, if I may say so, of the graduates will have a successful university career. Some of the PhD candidates, of course, they move on with the first postdoc, then maybe with the second postdoc, but then at the end, they will decide that they have to leave the system and to find a career, embark on a career on a different way. So that means that in the past, the PhD was the qualification for an academic career. Nowadays, a PhD is a qualification for a career as a leader in your field, a leader in the company you're joining, a leader of research and development, be it in industry, be it in the public sector, be it as an entrepreneur, be it as an entrepreneur within a company. And what we have also learned is that whereas in the past, you know, the picture of the ivory tower, it was more or less accepted at the universities, and they're dealing with this themselves. Essentially, it's not acceptable anymore. So nowadays we have very clearly formulated expectation that universities have to contribute and have to play an essential role to shape the knowledge society. And knowledge is key. Knowledge is key in the first place also for your personal development and the success. We have clear statistics that the higher your qualification is, the lower is the likelihood that you will be unemployed. The higher your qualification is, the higher will be your salary. We know that people are happier. So there's, in the first place, knowledge from the basis of a personal development and success. But it's also relevant for the development of the region, of the institution in the first place, of the nation, of the country, and in essence also for the globe. Societies, as we are experiencing nowadays, they need highly skilled professionals to increase their innovative capacity. We have to deal with multiple challenges nowadays, and we need critical, creative thinkers, highly skilled professionals, as I said, to cope with these issues. And it's clear that who else, we would say, and universities are those who are providing this intellectual capacity and the research potential for our societies. And for us, when we think about how to design our training programs, we need to find ways actually to link education and research activities with the requests from outside, with societal needs, with applications in industry, the commercial sector. But in general, I would say to have also a social impact and to improve the quality of life in general. So thinking back of what happens in Europe, just to briefly mention this, the reform of doctoral education in Europe really kicked off in 2005. I don't know how many of you have heard about the Bologna process, the idea that we make the the educational programs all over Europe are more permeable, that people can move from masters in Austria to PhDs in France, to from a bachelor in Sweden to a master in Germany. So this is the idea behind the Bologna process. And in 2005, it was recognized that we should also talk about doctoral education. And the kickoff event took place in Salzburg in Austria by chance, because the Austrian were chairing the EU in that year. And it was stressed that the doctorate is something completely different than the bachelor and master, because the doctoral education is based on research. So the key phrase is training through research. It's a training activity, but it's research-led. And what is stressed in the Salzburg principles, that this kind of training needs to be embedded in institutional strategies. So this is what I meant before. It's highlighted that it is an institutional responsibility to take care that this doctoral education is properly accordingly provided. And then we had a revisiting of the Salzburg principles, the so-called Salzburg II recommendations in 2010. And they again underlined this unique research-based character. And they also underlined this the linking role of doctoral education. The ERA stands for the European Research Area, the idea that we create an area in Europe where research findings are mobile, so to say, where people work together independently of national borders. The Lisbon strategy, moving Europe on top, is the idea, moving Europe forward to become an innovative leader in the world. This is the European Research Area. And the second area is the so-called European Higher Education Area. So we have one area of higher education in Europe. And the link between these two major policies, I would say, is actually doctoral education. It's about education, it's about research, so this is where it comes together. So what is stressed in the Salzburg principles, actually, this is essential. The doctorate is the research-based. And this was also important because what we saw when we started the initiatives in 2005 to keep it more, get the doctoral education more structured, universities somehow started to put more coursework into the doctorate, which was not the idea of structuring it. So this is why it was stressed that the doctorate experience as such, or the doctoral journey, is something which is highly individualized. It depends on this individual contribution. It's an original path, how knowledge is created. And nonetheless, it has to be somehow structured. So, and this was the, not really a dilemma, but this had to be thought through, how to provide proper structures so that the individual can follow his own ideas, his own research interests, without getting lost in the system. In 2011, somehow the Salzburg principles, the Salzburg recommendation, and also later on the Salzburg III, moving Salzburg forward, recommendations were written and published by the European University Association, which means it's the association of universities in Europe. So it was, so to say, a bottom-up initiative from the universities. So they decided and they discussed widely how doctoral education, given all the diversity in Europe, can be somehow structured in a way that we can all agree that these are real fundamental principles. The European Commission also contributed to the discussion with the principles of innovative doctoral training, and they stressed in particular interdisciplinarity. They stressed in particular intersectoral mobility and the international dimension. And then Salzburg really looked at other questions which popped up, which become more urgent: the ethics, research integrity, the digital agenda, globalization, and in particular also the topic of how to best engage with other stakeholders. with the future employers of our graduate students. So the first major trend was the rise, I would say, the rise and the development of the graduate schools. As you have established in your university, this overarching structure taking care of the students. And if you look what's happened, and this is quite, I would say, dramatic. In 2006, a year after Salzburg, less than 30% of the universities answered to a survey that they have graduate schools in place. In 2013, so just 7 years later, this number has more than doubled. And I think we are now beyond 90% of universities who say we have doctoral schools in place. Because in 15 years, these major changes happened in most of the universities in Europe, and these are thousands. And I put it there, the functions are consistent, the nomenclature it varies. So the doctoral schools actually are in place and are shaped according to the national frameworks, to the national needs. So sometimes on program level, sometimes on faculty level, sometimes there's 1 or 2 graduate schools for the whole university. And sometimes there are even inter-institutional doctoral schools between several universities. Just to mention, for instance, the doctoral, I think it's a graduate school or doctoral schools in physics in Scotland. So they join forces, the different universities in Scotland, and they form their own doctoral school. So, but the functions, as I said, are consistent. The idea of the doctoral schools are very much the same. The second major trend, what's happened, is to give up on this strict master-apprentice model. So the supervisor and the supervisee, the professor and the student. And we changed it to a more collective approach, team supervision, co-supervision, make sure also that there is a cohort of students working together, there's peer learning possible and actually encouraged, and to provide structures for the doctorate, less with respect to taught courses, but more to give them a kind of an additional training, helping them to design their research project, which usually lasts 3, 4, 5 years. So what happened is somehow, instead of the black box, which we had in the past sometimes, you did not really know from the university's perspective what's going on in this kind of relationship, quite very private relationship, and sometimes we talk about the deprivatization of doctoral education. So we see the research element, and this is a continuous effort to do research because it's training through research. And this takes 1, 2, 3, 4, quite often 5 years. But then, in addition to that, in particular doctoral schools, what they're doing is they provide this transferable professional skills training. And then there are some taught elements. Could be seminars, rarely a lecture in that sense. So this is what we think when we're talking about structured doctoral education, and this is a combination of all these different elements. Then another major, so to say, finding or understanding is that we shifted focus from the thesis as the product of the PhD to the individual. And one famous quote is coming from Sir Gareth Roberts, who did a review in 2002 already in the UK, when they realized that their PhD graduates are very weakly prepared for jobs outside academia. And while this quote is, so to say, very often used because it expresses very nicely the shift of focus. So the product that the PhD researcher creates is not the thesis. Vital so that it is their subject area through aggregation of original knowledge. The product that the PhD researcher creates, is the product of their study, is the development of themselves. So it's the young researcher. Mary Ritter, former vice or provost from Imperial College, it's a brain training program. We train PhD candidates to think, to socialize, to become members of the discipline, steward of the disciplines, sometimes called. This is what they're trained in, but it's the person who counts. The thesis gives evidence that you're able to do proper research. But what counts at the end are the people. What is also very important, and this was not in existence, I would say 20 years ago, is the importance of the skills agenda. And if you look at the skills agenda, and this is just, you find many different documents phrasing them or structuring them in a different way. I just used the from UK Research Council's joint skills statement. It's in the first place, of course, it's the research skills and techniques, methods, that you're trained as a researcher and you know what needs to be done, you know the methods, you're aware of what is the state of the art of research. But then it's the research environment, understand the ethical issues, understand peer review systems, understand how to deal with conflicts of interest, understand what it means to exploit results, understand what it means to generate impact. Then it's the research management area. So learn how to perform research, learn how to run a project over 3 or 4 years. So project management skills, this is something you would, every PhD candidate, but not only the PhD candidates. Also, if you work, for instance, in the administration, you will need to manage your own projects, to stick to deadlines, to set up the milestones which are reasonable, to deal with data. Data stewardship is another keyword, information literacy. So this is all related to the research management. Then it comes to personal effectiveness, self-discipline. Stamina is one of the key ingredients you need to actually be successful with your PhD, in addition to maybe frustration tolerance and other skills. Self-discipline, motivation, stay motivated, show initiative, be aware of your self-limitations, understand your training needs. Completely different to a bachelor or a master. In essence, the university is not telling you what you have to learn. Yeah, so it's under your, we always say it's the PhD is under your own management. You have to understand that it's your project. Yeah, and you as a PhD candidate, the PhD candidates are in the driver's seat. Communication skills, of course, writing. The recommendation would be write often, yeah, in different styles of text. Oral presentation to different audiences, to a scientific audience, to the public. Get engaged in teaching, get some teaching experiences, part of your communication. Learn how to give feedback to younger colleagues. Learn how to behave in a discourse with your students, but also learn how to talk to the media. Learn how to use social media also to position yourself maybe. Networking, team working, understanding how to function in a research group, learn how to function in an intercultural, international environment, understand the wider research community, and how you have impact on others, how you engage. And lastly, I mentioned the career management. So understand yourself, what is the nature of the transferable skills you actually have. Understand the range of career opportunities within and outside academia. This is quite often a challenge for young PhD candidates, that they're able to actually articulate what they have learned during their training. I put in bold the ownership. So it's not the university, it's not the university college, it's not the program which actually gives them the final boost to find the job. It's the career management should be in the ownership of the PhD candidate, the PhD student. But of course, the university program, in particular also the college, they provide an environment to help you to set maybe also realistic goals and understand your development needs. For everyone who wants to dig deeper, I would recommend to look, for instance, at the Research and Development Framework, which was done in 2010 by VITE, which is an organization mainly supported by universities. Now it's a semi-private, semi-profit-oriented institution. But they came up with this framework after intensive discussions and consultations with the academic community, and they came up with describing 4 domains: the knowledge and intellectual abilities is one domain, the personal effectiveness is another, the research governance and organization as a third, and the last, the engagement, influence, and impact. And then they came up with subdomains, and I think more than 60 descriptors. And when we do a training with our PhD candidates, what we learn, they are usually overwhelmed when we show them this kind of this framework. I said, oof, do I really have to gain all these 60, 67 skills? And this is not the answer, of course. But this framework, on the first place, it helps PhD candidates, but maybe also supervisors and others to actually reflect on the skills and help them to articulate actually what kind of skills PhD candidates, but this framework actually is true for also senior researchers as well, gain but through when they are performing research. So it's relevant, and there's a nice literature to look at, because it's not only the framework, but it also describes nicely how you can develop within this framework. When you start, for instance, having your first tutorship, start teaching and develop during your researcher career to become a kind of head of a curriculum, for instance, a program. So they also indicate the steps how to develop as a person, as a professional. When I talk about towards the modern doctorate, I would say it's determined by the interplay between the professional research experience and the personal development. Focus is the person. The most important outcome of which is an individual trained with what we believe, a unique set of high-level skills, so that they are at the end are creative, critical, autonomous, intellectual risk takers. These are the ones we believe must have an impact to save, so to say, the planet. First of all, PhD students are the drivers of their professional development. They should be immersed in a research-intensive environment, so this is critical. It's a training through research. Research excellence is still key to have this kind of full experience for a PhD candidate. The boundaries with other research areas should be permeable, so it should be not just focusing on your individual silo you are working in, but you should be open, and this is part of what the environment should provide. Make exchanges easily possible with other areas, with connections also to the outside world and to other sectors in the society. And the skills development, research skills, but also personal skills, is the cornerstone of the modern doctorate. And here I'm referring, for instance, to a paper by LERO. LERO is an association, it's the League of European Research Universities. They came up with a policy paper called the Doctoral Degree Beyond 2010, Training Talent and Researchers for Our Society. So these are the research universities. It's Oxford, Sorbonne, Leiden, University College London, this kind of university. And they say, we are not training for academic careers. We are training our researchers, most talented people, to become researchers for the society. Change society, has an impact on the society and the development of improving the planet. I'm invited here from the university college, the overarching structure at your university. And I think these kind of overarching structures are actually key for a success if you want to mainstream the new vision of the doctorate. Of course, in close cooperations with subject-focused programs. I learned that you have more than 60 programs in your university, which sound to me quite a lot compared to the university, which has 4 times more PhD candidates, and we have only 12 programs. So even more important is that you have overarching structures, I would say, when it comes to strategy, when it comes to quality assurance, when it comes to attempts to how to integrate the different approaches to the doctorate, when it comes to fostering interdisciplinarity Soft skills is a great opportunity also to get students from different fields together, work together, exchange when it comes to outreach activities. And of course, subject-specific training is mostly in the hand. And it's not the question is that one is in the hand of the second is the one thing in the hand of the overarching structure, and for other things is the programs which are subject focused. It's of course an interplay. It's depending on the collaboration between two. But you can say it's mainly the task of the overarching structure. The other things are mainly task of the programs. And when I'm looking at your website, it's exactly what I'm reading there. So you arrived already, I would say. This is what you're doing: complementary training to scientific research, contributing to the professional and personal development of each participant. You're focusing on the individual so that they understand their needs, encourage interpersonal relationships, strengthen the researcher's emotional health. Well-being is another hot topic nowadays, in particular during this pandemic global crisis. So some to-dos from my perspective is, in the first place, is promote skills training. Think about how to establish a well-rounded, attractive professional development program, which is in a sense designed so that the doctoral candidates, and we in Europe we call them often doctoral candidates to emphasize that they are early researchers instead of calling them students. So if this is a little bit confusing during my talk. So the program should be in a way designed so that the PhD candidates, the young professionals, so to say, they can pick according to their needs. And as I mentioned already, and I tried to re-emphasize it, the whole professional development should be in the ownership of the young researcher. So it would be helpful to provide them some tools so that they can self-reflect, self-assess, self-monitor, track somehow where they are, so that the ownership is somehow reinforced. And then it's a task to really think about how to promote innovation, how to promote the exchange between the different programs, learn from others. The beauty of universities is that usually universities are quite open to share the best practices. So it's really an advantage to be within this kind of environment so that we can learn from each other. As I try to communicate what my experience are, I'm also hoping to learn from what's going on in your specific environment. Collaborate with employers to ensure that the professional development of our researchers is suitable to an academic career, but also for other sectors. And also collaborate with employers so that they understand that they are aware of the skill set our PhD holders bring with them. And then I would say a last recommendation is to connect with the alumni, because they are most convincing when it comes to informing the PhD students about first-hand insights, what they experienced when they moved outside academia, what they experienced, and what are my skill gaps, and what would I have benefited from in my career when I have learned early on. Of course, the school has to know what's going on, giving up the numbers, make sure that the professional development is actually encouraged also in the different programs, and think about measures how to understand better where the destinations are of the careers of your PhD graduates. So keeping numbers is something which is, of course, highly relevant. Somehow more tricky is maybe create the quality culture. If you set up this kind of channel framework, sometimes easier to start with rules and processes, key indicators. But I think the question is how to create a culture so that not only you create this ownership for this professional development within the population of your PhD candidates, but also to create this kind of ownership for the new vision of the doctorate within the faculty. So quality means the quality of the structural, the administrative, the research environment are all the different aspects on the departmental level, the school level, on the faculty level. On the subject, in the subject-specific programs, and of course the quality of the output. And this can be nicely seen if you're following the destinations where your PhD candidates are ending up. Why overarching structures are so important is because the quality enhancement requires a strategic approach, a strategy for continuous professional development. And here I mean not only for the PhD candidate, but for all the people involved in the doctoral processes. I mean the policymakers, I mean the supervisors, but as a representative of a professional administrator, I mean also the professional administrators. They are often the ones who are running the system in the background, who are providing these kind of trainings, who help students to reach out to other communities. And so I want to have this last to do is ensure that you have an effective supervision in place, which means provide workshops, create formats where supervisors can actually exchange their supervisory experience. They can exchange their supervisory pedagogy. We are working in an environment where a lot of people are doing things they have never been trained for. Yeah? You are trained as a faculty member, you are trained to do research, mainly. Yeah? Some of you may have some training in teaching. Very few of you, I guess, have training in managing things. Even less maybe have a training in how to supervise. This is a super complex task. And I addressed here some in this different bubbles. It's about improving the preparation for a PhD. It's helping to have a proper selection process, improving the local quality, the local environment, making a combination between work and PhD possible, facilitating what we call the combi PhD sometimes, but also understand if something is going wrong, have a balance between support and freedom, and avoid misunderstandings. So one of the key words is what I put here is managing expectations and clarifying their relationship. As a supervisor, you get used to supervise PhD candidates, but you have to understand that it's something completely new for each individual candidate. Yeah? And of course, what should also be part of this kind of exchange about supervisory practice is also the sharing of the vision of the modern doctorate. Understanding that makes no sense to create clones of yourself. Yeah, usually the professors, the supervisors, they like what they are doing. Yeah, but they have to accept and also understand that on average, you should not assume that your PhD candidates, your supervisees, will follow the same career track that you have followed. Just because we know that less than 20% will end up in academia at the end. For thinking ahead a little bit, some questions which are looking for answers, and I have no answers for this, I must say. So if we agree that scholarship is at the heart of the doctorate, we might question ourselves what encourages and discourages truly adventurous scholarship. Are we doing more of the same, or do we encourage our PhD candidates to go for the risky project, to enter new ground? Or if we think about metrics, completion rates, are we not more discouraging them to do this really fantastic stuff, but doing more of being more on the safe side, to find a balance? We are expected to contribute to resolving solving challenges which are facing in the society. So the question is how we can make the application of knowledge beyond the academia an integral part of the doctoral experience, so that the students are somehow, as part of the training, as I said, integral part of the training, they are somehow forced, encouraged to exchange with a factor outside of academia. And when we know that our PhD candidates will pursue a career beyond academia, how can we create an essential and ongoing relationship with those who manage the doctoral process on one side within universities and the ones who are actually employing our graduates? If we do what we always did, I said it already, we will get what we have always got. And change does not come by chance. So it's something we need some kind of actions. And I think this, hopefully this short presentation is also giving some kind of food for thought in this respect. And what has been achieved, I would say in many, in particular Western European countries nowadays, and it's a little bit a question of budget also. So Eastern Europeans are more disadvantaged with this respect. But what happened in Europe is that we are offering transferable skills training for PhDs nowadays. And I think this is an important first step. But what we have to recognize is the doctoral education is still in a period of transition, and the reform is still going on. It's far from complete. And when we want that our planet is saved, and we want that we can somehow meet the complex challenges we are facing, we will require super best educated citizens who can make the smart and necessary tough decisions which are ahead of us. So my critical question is, will it be enough just to add sometimes detached components to the program, but otherwise focus only on the unchanged practices of research, communication, knowledge, and quality assessment? Is it just enough to say, okay, now we are taking care and provide some kind of transferable skills training program, and we keep the subject-specific programs as is? Or do we need some more radical measures to be taken? For instance, related to the quality assessment, how to assess the quality of a PhD candidate at the end. A nice final quote is from the former president of the Carnegie Foundation, Lee Shulman. He said the best doctoral program attempt to discover, so he called it the sweet spot between conservation and change by teaching skepticism and respect for earlier traditions and sources, while encouraging strictly new ideas and courageous leaps forward. So this is the challenge, and I'm optimistic that universities will be able to deal with the challenge, but because again, who else has the intellectual capacity to do so? I want to just have this on the slides because what I was presenting is not, of course, only coming from my thoughts, but it's really coming from so many exchanges and discussions with friends, colleagues, professionals, academic leaders from more or less all over the world. And I would like just to have them mentioned here: David Bowie, Jan Botter, Jean-Jean Pass, and many others who have really contributed and all share the idea of they want to improve the quality of doctoral education. We want to improve the doctoral experience of our candidates so that they are able to make a major impact to our future, to the planet. That's from my side. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I send you greetings from Vienna. It's already dark night here. Thank you very much for listening. And now I have to stop this.
Okay. Well,
how to do
thank you very much, Dr. Zinner, for this wonderful lecture, wonderful talk. We really enjoyed, and I was thinking while listening to you how I wished that we had a pretty large audience from different places in Brazil, but how I wished that much more people were watching your talk, your lecture. But we are fortunate that this lecture will be recorded, will be available through the internet, through YouTube. So I have no doubts that many people will many more people will access this talk in the following days, because this was really a very special talk for us, a very special reflection or considerations for us to have a broader understanding on doctoral education. And before I open for questions, we have some questions from the audience. Well, first, Dr. Zinner not only accepted our invitation in a very kind manner, but he also is giving this talk. It's already past 6 p.m. in Vienna.
Yeah.
So it's night already, it's evening, and you're here with us. So thanks very much for
my
that.
Pleasure. It's my pleasure.
But I was thinking that I would open with a first question of mine. I was thinking while listening to you that so many changes, and I would say mostly positive changes, happened in the world after the Second World War. So, for example, the National Science Foundation in the US started in the early 50s, actually 1950. In Brazil, the two most important agencies in support of science, research, and graduate education, CNPq and CAPES. CNPq is the agency related, linked to the Ministry of Science and Technology in Brazil, while CAPES is the agency focused on supporting doctoral education, graduate education in Brazil, and is linked to the Ministry of Education in Brazil. These two agencies started in 1951. So the point is, there were so many positive changes after a major event that was the war. And now we have this major event in the world, the coronavirus pandemic. And I wonder how much change this global event will bring to doctoral education, to doctoral formation. So that was a first point, and now I'm going to read some of the questions that we received. We had, I would say, not only a large audience, but a very concentrated or very dedicated audience, really paying attention to what was said. And from the comments, I can say that people really enjoyed your talk. So I would start with this very first question. I would say a very provocative question, but what can happen? What can we expect from this pandemic event that is changing the world regarding doctoral education?
I would say what we definitely learned, and this is, to speak globally, it's a little bit different, but what we learned definitely is the power and the need for research. So I think that the research has never been that present in the media, in the public, as it has been during the last year. So the necessity of research. And what we also learned, and this is of course a question of communication, is when we think about vaccination, for instance, and the speed how they produced it with all the difficulties. But what we learn is the importance of basic research. So if we think about the MNR technology, it's depending on research which is 20 years old. So what the universities, the opportunity we have, is that we make the best out of this pandemic to communicate the value of research, to understand what's going on and why we need it. This is one thing. I think this has never been that obvious. And what we also see, and this is also interesting, when I think about the discussion, who were the main researchers active in the discussion? It was in the beginning. It had been the epidemiologists, the virologists. Now it becomes that it's the economics people. We're talking about the impact. We are talking about psychologists. So we see this is actually an issue, a crisis, which deserves, which requires interdisciplinary research, which requires people who are able to communicate with other disciplines to understand the full picture. It's not just a question of vaccination. I think we are facing, and I'm a little bit afraid of the economic crisis, which will come later on. This will be the major crisis, how to behave in a solitary way to others. This is one thing. The other thing, what happens was, when I was talking with colleagues from Sub-Saharan Africa, and I have some projects with them, what they say, we don't want to go back to the old normal. The way how we are now able to communicate, it's the way somehow I present or I discuss with you quite some thousands kilometers away. Yeah, nowadays this is what we have learned. We don't have to catch the plane all the time. Also, I would love to come, of course. but so being more open. I have another statistics with publications, for instance, showing that Brazil is doing one of the best when it comes to open access publications. So to share knowledge globally, to be open for conferences for researchers in countries which are which are less funded, yeah, which have less resources. So all these kind of issues are something which is changing, of course, and this will have an impact on doctoral education as well. The opportunities nowadays that our PhD candidates globally can interact I think will change dramatically in the next decade.
Yes, well, thanks. Definitely. The pandemics is not over yet, of course. It's actually still causing a lot of pain and suffering here in Brazil. I believe, unfortunately, that the pandemic will last much longer than we expected or anticipated. Yeah. But on the other hand, I have no doubts that the pandemics, after we overcome the pandemics, there will be lots of new opportunities. And as you mentioned, for example, I would say that one of the main legacy of the pandemics is that we really learned how to use, for example, these platforms such as StreamYard and YouTube and other platforms to be more connected. So although we do plan to have you here in Brazil, we need you here in Brazil. It will be, I hope next year we can plan your visit. But for example, we are now interacting thousands of kilometers away. And it's amazing how these platforms are being used in a very smart, very clever way. So somehow we are learning new ways to not only to cope with the difficulties brought by the pandemics, but we are learning how to interact in different manners, etc. So this is, I would say, at least from this very tragic event, it can be seen as a positive aspect.
Yeah, but to give you an example, for instance, we in a university, so we are running transferable skills training, about 80 courses a year. Yeah, and what we have done in the past, it was always a little bit of a challenge to get international trainers on board because it was expensive. We have to fly them in, you have to pay extra days. And now we are recruiting trainers, for instance, in training in entrepreneurship, and the guy is sitting in Italy. We have another trainer on well-being, and she's sitting in New Zealand. Yeah? And this is now possible. So we are also, there are opportunities, and it's not just the threats and not just the drama. Of course, it's a drama. But we also have to see that there are other opportunities now, and we can benefit from. Yeah.
Well, going for some of the questions from our audience, Dr. Leda Maria from our university, she's a professor here at the Federal University of Goiás, art professor. She asks, with so many challenges in the world, for example, we are talking, of course, now about the pandemics, but we have this terrible and very challenging global environmental crisis, which the climate crisis or the climate change is one of the aspects of a more complex situation that is the global environmental change or modifications of the environment. So anyway, she wonders if we are prepared as teachers to prepare our students, our doctoral students, to such challenges. So that is the first question from Professor Leda Maria. And if you allow me, I'm going to use or to make a set of 2 questions so you can answer both questions, and then we go to another set of 2 questions and so on. And Dr. Marcia Bacchion, who also is, not by chance, the adjunct prorector of graduate studies at our university. And Dr. Bacchion asks, in the international context, do companies and industries seek to hire people who have completed doctoral education? In Brazil, it seems that this expectation does not exist. So again, the first question deals with the challenges. Are we preparing our doctors, future doctors, in the appropriate way? And Dr. Bacchion, in the second question, she wonders, she asks if the industry, for example, the private sector, would be willing really to hire the new doctors. This seems to be a very particular challenge in Brazil.
Okay, so what I think the universities are doing better and better to train PhD candidates. So of course, we cannot expect that the PhD candidates are actually solving the world's problem. Yeah, but what we are doing is now we stop just looking at a certain very well defined research problems and then come out with a nice paper and are satisfied at the end. So what is happening now at the universities in general, in particular also to doctoral education, I would say, is that we are more and more asked to think about the impact of what we are doing, the relevance. Yeah, it should be the relevance for the topic, but it should be also relevance for society. And what we are doing, and when we are doing this kind of basic research, it's always related somehow to helping to solve the global challenges. In Europe, there are major funding schemes addressing what they call now the new missions in Horizon Europe. When big grants are rewarded, and if you think about awarding big grants, the question is who is doing the research within these research projects, and it's mainly the PhD candidates and the postdocs. Yeah, so of course they are involved, and of course they are. We are training them to think, to work in bigger teams, to exchange internationally, to address these issues. And of course, it's a mosaic, and it's a major challenge. But the better the people are educated, and the more we are successful to get our graduates in relevant positions as academic leaders, research leaders, leaders in companies, but also as political leaders, yeah, it will have an impact. Yeah, and I think this is what we have to encourage them to also to translate to the general public what they are doing. But of course, it's a challenge. Yeah, but I think the research power is there, and I think there is also a shift in the population of PhD candidates. So what some people call the millennials, they are interested to have. To do something which is meaningful. So they are not just solving this kind of tricky questions. They want to do something which is meaningful. So it's not so much that with universities we have to convince them that they have to do something which has an impact, but we have to facilitate somehow the process that they can do something which is rigor with respect to research method, but which is also meaningful for them and therefore also maybe for society. I think it's a process. And the difficulty is, of course, you mentioned that the world is changing so rapidly. So we see an exponential growth also with respect to the crisis somehow. But if you look at what happened with respect to doctoral education, how it has been, you can maybe see it also in your own institution, how doctoral education was organized. How was it discussed? How was it approached? 10 years ago and now, I guess you will see some major changes. And I think this is the same in Austria, this is the same in Europe. What was not even okay to mention or to address as an issue 10 years ago is something which is standard discourse nowadays. So I think we are moving in this direction. And of course, if you are in the system, you're suffering that it's moving so slowly. Yeah, but also because you are so motivated to see the changes happening. And now I talked too much, I forgot the second question.
Well, the second question, Marcia Bacchion was wondering if companies, for example, in the international context, if they are willing to value this doctoral education by hiring PhD holders.
Of course, it depends on your economic structure. Yeah. So it depending. What we see is that small medium enterprises are less easy. It's less easy to. It's more difficult to convince them that they should hire PhD holders. But what we also see, if they hired once, they hire them again because they see the difference. Yeah, I think that there are programs, the industrial doctorate in Denmark, the CIFRE scheme in France, which are super successful programs. There's thousands. I think in the moment there are about 3,000 PhD candidates in France are running within the CIFRE scheme. Yeah, which means that they do a PhD together with the company, and 90% of these PhDs who complete then actually get a job in the industry. So it a little bit depends on your economic structure. But if you move your economy towards a more knowledge economy, they would need more knowledgeable people. Yeah. So it of course depends on on the local economic structure, but we are moving definitely in this direction. I think what is important is that we as universities and that our PhD candidates, the PhD holders, are able to articulate what makes the difference. Yeah, and that they are not just niche players who are very narrowly trained. And I think what we have to do, and this is our task, or your task at the college, is to communicate the skill set, this specific skill set PhD candidates bring to the companies outside. So this is a little bit of a communication issue as well. I think they will learn. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have a question here, and it is very well related to the second question. Alcides Moraes, he asks, who is really benefiting from the doctoral education? Institutions, academic institutions, or private companies? And then he adds that something needs to be done so that, what could be done, in fact, so that doctors could be kept in the academia. And I think that, so he goes in the opposite direction. He's asking, how can we keep doctors in the academia? I would like to add to this question a little bit of context. Of course, that as in any other place in the world, in a first moment, doctoral education in Brazil pursued, the goal was to provide academic institutions with new doctors to become teachers, professors, etc. And now it's like, I would say that we are trying to enter a third moment in the doctoral education program in Brazil. And of course, more and more, we are targeting companies and other institutions in the society. And as you pointed out in one of your slides, only about 20% of the doctors we train in the world will work in the academia. And that is pretty much natural. But it's interesting that Alcides asks, well, what can we do to keep these doctors in the academia? So I turn the question to you, but I think that part of the answer is that, of course, that right now, the positions opened in the academia, they are very small, they are very restricted. So of course that we need to prepare our doctors, our PhD holders, future PhD holders, to really work in different positions in the society as a whole. And this is also related to the first question, because I think that in Brazil, for example, we did a good job in training PhDs for the academia. So we produce good science. Our PhD holders, they know how to produce science, how to do science, and not for other reason. We rank very high globally in terms of publication, academic publication. But I think the big challenge for us now in Brazil is really how to prepare PhD holders to operate, to function outside the academic world. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
So the first question is, who is benefiting? I would say the benefit the most is, of course, the PhD candidates in the first place. So if they have a good doctoral experience and they went through a brain training program, they are people who are usually more satisfied, more mature, better able to deal with the different challenges they will face during their life. Therefore, I think the society as such is benefiting if we have better trained people. The question is how to convince industry or the external sector to absorb them. Is, as I said, it's also a question of communication, but it's also how the environment will change, and this will change for sure in Brazil as it had happened in other parts of Western Europe as such. I think when he asked how can we keep the doctorate holders in universities, I think that the critical question is, whom do we want to keep? And are we in universities attractive for those, what I call the creative risk takers, the people who are really innovative? Do we give them sufficient space to maneuver, or do they think finally a company like Google is more attractive? I think this is for us as a university something which we have to consider if we have established a system and structures so that it's really a place to be for a young, super creative person. This is something. On the other hand, of course, if you look at statistics, I can say in University of Vienna, we are graduating 600 PhD candidates per year, and we are recruiting 30 professors per year. So you do your calculation. Yeah. So we have to accept that most of them have to go elsewhere. But with respect to statistics, and I mentioned it as one as to deduce, with respect to statistics, we know that PhD holders earn more than master students. Master students earn more than bachelors. So if you break it down to the very simple facts, yeah, they benefit. Yeah, it's also a money investment, so to say, in your brain. If you invest in your brain, yeah. But how to establish, and this is a question if maybe also the, so to say, the ministry can contribute, maybe with some funding schemes to encourage this exchange also already during the study programs, yeah, with internships, for instance, or getting people from industry on board. There is also discussions: is it okay to be as a member, as a non-academic? Is it allowed to be part of the final committee, for instance, when it's about assessing the candidates? So how we as universities are opening up to society also, or how strict we are, I think we are the only one who can actually assess the quality. Yeah? Which then means quite often we are just assessing as we always have assessed, as I mentioned it already. Yeah? So think the universities need a little bit more of creative courage. Yeah, how we want to do it. Yeah, to get in a kind of a really open discourse with society and how we want to do it.
Okay.
These are all very good, but also very difficult answers.
Yes, I agree. Very subjective.
Difficult questions.
Very broad, very subjective questions. And well, we have many very interesting questions here for you, and I'm going to alternate them a little bit. So Renato Siniro asks, sorry, I hear some echo. Okay, but Renato Siniro asks, how can we ensure quality with so many budget cuts in education? And I would add to that question is that in Brazil, in particular, it seems that we are going completely in the opposite direction of the more, I would say, developed world. So in times of crisis, countries usually invest more. And for the last maybe 5 years in Brazil, our budget for science and education in general have been reduced in a very dramatic manner. So he asks, okay, how can we ensure, how can we have good education, a good educational system, and here with the focus on the doctoral education, if the budgets are being cutting and are becoming very, very low and scarce. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that, because here in Brazil, we are having a very hard time at our institutions to convince the government and the society in general that investments, public investments in education and in science, they are very necessary. And for example, if we go to the United States, most of the investments in science, basic science, they are not from the private sector, but from the public sector. So anyway, Renato asks, how can we ensure good quality education with such low budgets?
I think it's of course it's a good question, and it's difficult to answer. And of course, if you have in your political leadership people who are not believing in research, but more following the kind of post-truth dogmas, it's difficult. On the other hand, if I mentioned what needs to be done to create a quality culture in your institution, it's not only about money. Yeah, it's about opening up discussions. It's allowing interdisciplinary exchange. It's you can do a lot of transferable skills training, for instance, by identifying people who are just good at something. Yeah, I guess you have a lot of academic staff who are excellent writers. Ask them to contribute to this kind of training. You have people, alumni who have started their own businesses, ask them to do a training on entrepreneurship maybe. So I think creating a quality culture is not only about money. Of course, money helps a lot. Yeah, and what we know is that in particular, the funding of PhD candidates is key, so that they are likely to graduate in a reasonable time to complete their studies. And of course, in all the areas of science, where you just need money to do your experiments, it's key. So therefore, the question is how to influence the society in such a way that they maybe they vote differently. But I'm not in the position to give. But this is exactly, it's the same danger with Trump. And I think what happens, for instance, next to Austria, Hungary, I don't know if you are following this, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare for academia if you have this, so to say, if you have politicians who are not interested in critical thinking citizens. Yeah. And you see that, so you see somehow indirectly the importance of universities is when they attack the academic freedom. You see that obviously there's a good reason to be afraid of the university, because this is what we are doing. We are training critical citizens. Yeah, and I think this is the best way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the right word you said, nightmare. What we are going through in Brazil right now is a nightmare, not only regarding budgets, but all the criticism against science, for example. So it's very contradictory that at the moment that we need science the most, we have people criticizing or questioning vaccine and science as a whole, etc. So it's a nightmare. But I also agree with you that although money or investments, financial investments are of fundamental importance, of course, money is not the only attribute behind a good quality education. So,
but of course it helps.
Yes. Okay, I have a question from Marcia Bacchion. And as you mentioned, the main goal or the ultimate goal of a doctoral education is to provide critical thinkers to society as a whole. So, and Marcia asks, what kind of institutions would be interested in hiring critical thinkers? So, is the society, on the other hand, or thinking in a different way, is the society ready for these critical thinkers? And in particular, the society in the countries, as you mentioned, and in Brazil in particular, are we ready for these critical thinkers?
So maybe in some of these countries, the ministries are not hiring critical thinkers at the moment. But if you think about the major companies nowadays, say Apple or Google, they are depending on what we have called 20 years ago when they started as disruptive technologies. So these are people who think something completely new. It's just not incremental, doing a little bit better than we have done before, but thinking something radically new. And if you think about so we will not. It's a little bit of drama here, but we will not save the planet if we just do some kind of incremental changes to our general behavior. Yeah, we need some kind of radical changes, and therefore you have to think out of the box. It's not just to apply what you have learned. And I think this is what PhD candidates learn, is to be critical about others, respectful but critical to others' work. Yeah, this is what they have to learn. This is what we have to train them. No money required for this. To be critical on what are my thoughts and my.
And I think it's a very subtle, very delicate balance between being respectful or respect tradition, and at the same time looking forward for more disruptive changes. So it's a very delicate balance, but it's necessary. And I definitely agree that society is really threatened, or society is in a big danger if we only act by incremental changes. We need to be more radical, for sure. And and Marcia also asks, time management, she wonders, time management, learn how to prioritize, how to teach these skills, time management, for example, the ability to prioritize. But at the same time, or on the other hand, Rita Andrade, she asks, first she thank you for such a refreshing overview on doctorate training and programs. So she really liked. And she wonders if those skills that Marcia mentions, like time management and so many other skills, if these skills, they should be stimulated and developed at the university prior to entering or pursuing a doctorate degree. I mean, are these skills, should these skills be taught before?
I would say you gain the skills only by doing. I think what the doctorate offers, the doctoral journey offers, is really and this is the only way you succeed at the end, is if you are able to manage time, if you are able to prioritize. What we are doing in the trainings, and I think this should not be a misunderstanding. You don't learn time management when you attend a one-day training and then you are a time manager. The point is that during the trainings, the first step, you raise the awareness that this is something you can, so to say, professionalize. There are tools available so that you can use. You should be reflective on what you are doing. You need to spend some time on planning. But we always say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So what we are doing in the trainings is we provide the tools. We make them aware of what's going on. And then it's the question of this, and this is why I mentioned that the supervisors play an important role. Then it's the question is how you do, for instance, your weekly, your monthly meetings with your PhD candidates. You can check as a supervisor, is there kind of an awareness with respect to planning? Are they aware of, because students, what we see is that they are, the challenge of a PhD is that usually the first time in their life, they have to manage a 4 or 5 years super complex project. And they are already overwhelmed with the research question. But then they have to teach. Then they have to prepare for a talk. Then they have to submit maybe their first abstract to prepare their first poster. Then they have to, they also have to somehow manage their supervisors. Yeah? So it's a super complex task. And what they have to learn is, okay, this is the time plan for my PhD journey. This is what I do in March, and this is what I have to do in June. And so they plan from scratch what they do with research. And then you ask them, so think about, but in July, you have to do a presentation. When are you preparing for the presentation? When do you spend time? And then they see it's getting complex. And we are not, the purpose of the training is in essence that we spend, let's forget about research, spend a day on how to plan the research journey for the next year. What kind of tools are available? It's also a question of how to communicate my planning with you as my supervisor. This is what we are training. And then it's the question, of course, if these tools are used so that they are able to that they learn to prioritize. It's not just a question of ticking the box and say, oh, I did a training on time management. Oh, I did a training. So as you do a training in ethics, if you do not behave ethically, it doesn't help if you you just know what you're doing wrong. Yeah? But it's coming from, it has to be kind of swallowed, digested, and then practiced.
Great.
Would be my answer.
And talking about the supervisor role, Denilson Teixeira, a professor here at the Federal University of Goiás, and also the executive coordinator of our program called UFG Doutoral, Denilson asks, well, first, he thank you very much for the lecture, and he asks you to comment on the challenges and the perspectives in the supervisor-student relationship.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The first one is, I would say one of the challenges is that every student is different. Every project is different, every student is different. It's the first place. The second is that we have to accept that every student, so to say, starts from scratch with the journey. The third thing is that usually what makes the relationship somehow different is that the mutual expectations are usually not made explicit. So there is a nice book from Babalova saying making the implicit explicit. Talk about how you want to interact with your PhD candidates. What are my expectations, and ask him what is his or her expectations. The question is also that every supervisor has his or her own pedagogical approaches, which usually they are not explicitly aware of. So give me an example. you can be a person as a supervisor who is following a kind of a more professional project management approach. Yeah, I am the project leader, my students are members of my team, and they have to do this kind of task, and they deliver, and we have some clear milestones, and this is the deadline, and this is what I'm expecting. So very well structured. And it could be that the PhD candidate is exactly the right candidate to follow these kind of approaches. But then there could be another approach, like thinking about socialization. So you become a member of my team, you're socialized to become a young academic. So it's much more about not only emotions, but you do not give them some kind of clear task, but you expect that they learn, so to say, by observing what's going on. And then there could be another professor, another supervisor who is following a kind of a critical thinking approach all the time. So he doesn't want to give kind of strict tasks to the PhD candidate. He wants the PhD candidates to be critical and asking and challenging the supervisor. And the issue is that every supervisor has a different approach, yeah? And the students are somehow observing what they see from others. They see that they are treated differently, for instance. Yeah, they don't see they don't understand what's going on because it's, for instance, because it's not made explicit. Yeah, and it's also, I think, a very professional supervisor has his, so to say, his preferred way how to do the supervision. But a very professional supervisor also has this kind of toolbox and say, okay, if this kind of critical thinking approach is not working with the candidate, let's try the project management approach, or let's try the more socializing approach, yeah, or following more this kind of culturalization approach. So I think this is something which a supervisor has to be aware of. Yeah, this is the toolbox I can use, and to treat maybe also PhD candidates differently over time. So they need more support in the beginning. You expect from them to be more critical, more on their own when they are in the 3rd or 4th years. So all these kind of different. This is super complex. If you have 3 or 4 PhD students, you have to understand. Okay, this is. With this one, I have some project we have to really manage. On the other hand is one which is asking for freedom. Yeah, they don't want to be too much told what they have to do, and they're all different. I think these are somehow related. And then you should complete, and then there's this guy from the graduate college who is looking at the completion rates. Yeah, and see what's going on here. So all this increases the challenges, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Great answer. Yes. And well, Lia Graça. Well, first of all, she really enjoyed your lecture. Everyone, in fact, did. And should like you to explain, maybe in a more thorough manner, what do you mean or what do you understand by not well prepared, or the fact that our PhD candidates are not well prepared? In which aspects? Anyway, you mentioned about this during your lecture, and should like you to talk more thoroughly about in which aspects you consider that PhD candidates lack a better training, or they need to be more prepared.
Mm-hmm. So this is what we see sometimes so I would say the beginning was somehow the study of Sir Roberts in the UK, this success for skills, or skills for success. And what they did is they looked at the PhD candidates and they asked employers and what are the skill gaps. And what they realized is, and this was, I would say, maybe 15 years ago or 20 years ago, that they said that the answers were there. What we see when we recruit the PhD candidate, or when we interview a PhD candidate, they are experts in the field. So they are the one and only experts on it for a certain molecule, or for a certain equation. Yeah. But if you ask them what kind of skills, so giving my example, I was doing my PhD about equation which was not solvable. So by definition, so it was clear that in general this partial differential equation cannot be solved. So it's a kind of, you can say it's a completely useless research somehow, because it does not reflect any situation in nature. But what I learned is to approach a problem, to analyze a problem, to think about potential solutions for certain aspects, to do this kind of critical thinking, maybe. So what we have to train the candidates in the first place is, I would say, to articulate what they have learned. Yeah. If you are entering a job and say, I did a partial differential equation which is not solvable, I can do nothing else. Yeah. Then of course it's difficult for employer to understand that this person brings really added value to my enterprise. And then it was really that the universities have just shown any interest has just shown interest in the thesis. So they were looking at the monograph, they were looking at the papers, they were interested in how they contribute to the production of research papers, but not really to see how they succeeded in their future careers. Yeah. And I think what we are doing with the training is, in essence, it's also a question of empowering the PhD candidates. You are bright, one of the brightest of this year. You are the one who solved major problems. You showed a lot of stamina on how to do it. You are able to cope with many problems you were facing, with emotional crisis, because every PhD candidate goes through some kind of dark valleys when they do their research. So this is everything. These are all the skills you have gained, and this is to learn them, to empower them, that they are proud of what they have achieved, that they are able to communicate in essence. And then, of course, also to be able to communicate to others, to understand, to explain to your grandma what you have done in your research, to explain to the public why this research is relevant. So I think universities are something universities have to do. Not just be satisfied with that they are so smart, yeah, but to tell society that it's worth. And I think this is definitely changing, yeah. But still, it's the question if it comes to assessment, for instance, and this is one of the major challenges. So we are talking about the shift from the thesis to the individual, but what we are assessing at the end is quite often still the number of papers with first authorship in high impact journals. Still, yeah. And if you have a candidate who is doing some, say, in sociology, is doing a project with disadvantaged communities, and they write the newspaper article, this is a nice to have, but doesn't count. Usually, because it's different for us. We don't have a currency for this, yeah, in university. I think this is what I meant with, maybe we should also rethink a little bit the how we assess the individuals at the end, and not just the piece of paper they have produced.
Before going, well, thank you, and I also agree. I think that going through the process of writing a PhD dissertation and going through the process of dealing with complex situations, complex problems, trying to solve those problems and trying to find meaning to those problems, I think that prepares you. That's a lot of skills that you acquire during the process. So I usually, I used to say for a long time now that I like to say that when we talk about doctoral education, the process is usually more important than the result.
Yes.
And I think that meets the key point of your talk today that the thesis or the dissertation is important, but the individual is more. So the focus on the individual is more important. And that is actually a question by Marcia Bacchion, and she would like you to talk a little bit more about this shift in focus from the thesis to the individual. And I would add that the title of your lecture is Doctor Education in a Changing World. I mean, that was for a changing world. But I would say that not only the world is changing, but our understanding of that doctoral education is also changing, is also evolving. Doctoral education, as you showed in your timeline, is about 200 years old. So depending on your perspective, it's already something old. And on the other hand, it can be seen as something very recent, only 200 years old. In Brazil, we are talking about less than 100 years that we established the doctoral programs. In fact, when we think about doctoral programs, as a matter of fact, in Brazil, we are talking about something that is very recent. We are talking about the last 50 years. Anyway, Marcia asks you to explain again, maybe in depth or more thoroughly, about this shift in focus from the thesis to the individual.
I would say in the what someone would call the good old days, and I'm referring now to the Austrian German-speaking system, so to say. So the good old days, it was you decided to start with a PhD or a doctorate. You tried to find a supervisor, a senior professor. Maybe you talked with him about your research project, and then you visited him again 5 years later and handed over your book. So this was that, and some I say there was no special interest. In Germany, they even still don't know how many PhD students they have in some areas. Because it takes as long as it takes, and then you have your book written, and if you're successful, you find a publisher, and that's it. And I think what happened is with the massification, but also with the interest that we want to take also the responsibility of these people. We don't want to accept that someone is not at all supervised, someone is lousily supervised, some are completely frustrating leaving the system because they never get feedback. So in the past it's under your control, you write your book and we will evaluate your book at the end if you get a PhD. And now we are interested to really see young people growing and developing based on or experiencing and training through research, as I mentioned. Yeah? And we want to see them developing, and we are monitoring how they develop, and we are discussing with them how they develop, and we come up with some agreements about how they should develop, about milestones, standard procedures now that we have this kind of dissertation agreement. So we are not so much focusing also in the interaction with the candidates anymore. Let's say, okay, it's not a milestone when you have to submit the certain chapters of your thesis. It's part of it, but it's also what are your training needs? What are your development needs? Where are you good at? How do you prepare for the next step on your doctoral journey? So the focus somehow, and of course, we want them to publish, because the written piece of work is somehow providing evidence that they learned to do research, that they are learned to be able to articulate what they have done in a convincing, for the academic community at least, convincing way, yeah, with the necessary rigor. Yeah. But what we want to see is we want to see the people developing, and we want to. This is why we are nowadays 20 years ago, universities in Essen didn't care where the PhD candidates ended up. Career destinations that did not matter. Yeah? Exceptions are the alumni who give back money to the universities. Yeah? But others, was not our business if they find a job. Yeah? And we are feeling much more dependent, are responsible for also the future careers. We are interested to learn from our graduates, from our alumni, how they perceive the training 5 years later, and what would they have learned better. Yeah, what kind of skills are they missing, and can we improve them easily? Yeah, teamwork, for instance. Yeah, is teamwork something which is highly relevant in the job nowadays? Usually, yeah. Is this what we are encouraging during universities, or do we focus on the egos, on the competition, or do we stress teamwork as one of a special value, for instance? Do we focus on intercultural competencies? Is this something we are focusing on? Because maybe in a big company this is relevant, because there is someone from Japan and someone from the US and someone from Argentina and someone from Brazil, and they have to work together. It's different, but is the university a place not only where they can kind of practice or experience it, but also where they can reflect, for instance, on different cultural backgrounds and behaviors? Yeah, it's also something which is not related to money. It's a question if we want to do it or not. Yeah, and I think this has not been tackled in the past at all. Yeah. And this is what I meant with the shift. We want to see. The nice book is there's a Rethinking Doctoral Education for the 21st Century, and they are talking about the discipline and a steward of the disciplines, and they are talking about a socialization process. It's about the integration into a community. Yeah? So we want a graduate. We want to be a part, so to say, of the community. Like it should be a kind of a belonging related to the PhD. Yeah? All this didn't happen in the past when it's just. So of course there is this, in German it's the Lehrer-Schüler, the Doktorvater, I don't know, yeah? So it's the father of your thesis and his pupils, so to say, but it's not a real question of belonging. Yeah, and this is what we are trying to emphasize nowadays.
Yeah, and it's interesting talking about teamwork, that at the same time that we are experiencing this shift from the focus on the thesis to the focus on the individual, it seems that in parallel, we are also observing the shift in focus from the individual to the team. So, and I think this would be our last comment. It's already, I would like to hear you on that. It's already 8 p.m., almost 8 p.m. in Vienna. And you have been...
2 minutes.
Two
2 minutes to 8.
Yes, yeah, 2 minutes to 8, yes. And you're here you're talking for about 2 hours, so we don't want to exploit you any longer. But I'd like to hear this last comment on, again, at the same time that there is this shift in focus from the thesis to the individual, in parallel, there is also this change, this shift in focus from the individual to the team. So I'll elaborate a little bit on that.
This is what I meant when I showed the slide with Willem from Homburg. I said one of the issues we are facing is structuralization and collectivization. So we are looking at the whole research production is now not working anymore as a kind of the super bright individual, but it's a team. Research is a team effort. Yeah, it's a team effort within the discipline, and it's even more a team effort if we look to tackle interdisciplinary problems. The big problems can only be tackled in an interdisciplinary way, and this is why it's in particular challenge to take care that we are not just rooted within our discipline. This is important. Yeah, as I said, I'm a mathematician by training. Yeah, but to learn and to translate their knowledge, to talk to others, to work, to function in teams with different disciplines, in teams with different hierarchies, yeah, to work together. I think this is one of the major changes, also how the research production as such happens, and how we are able to address major challenges. This is what we are learning at universities now. I think there's a reasonable awareness that we have to come up with bridges within our different areas of research. Yeah, I think if you have, I think about 60 or 63 doctoral programs, yeah, it's quite a challenge to think, okay, how to bridge, how to allow or facilitate interactions between the PhD candidates and the programs. Yeah? But the next challenge is how to interact with other stakeholders. In Europe, I don't know if you're aware of the citizen science concept, where you involve, so to say, external stakeholders, society, in your research projects. Yeah? So I think this needs team efforts. You need to communicate differently if you involve pupils, if you work with elderly people. Yeah, and it's not just that we from the universities, we are the smarter ones and tell you what to do, but we are the ones we can try to extract from what we learn from their needs, to translate them into research questions and tackle them, but in a kind of an interactive way. Yeah, and this can only be done with teamwork. Yeah, so I think without teamwork, we are done anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much once again, Lucas. Thank you very much for being with us, for delivering this great lecture. Everyone really enjoyed, and I have no doubts that in the following weeks, many more people will watch this lecture and really acquire a better understanding on the value and on the critical aspects of change regarding doctoral education, not only in Brazil, but in the world. Thank you very much. And I really hope to see you in Brazil next year. I hope that
I will do my best.
Yeah.
I will do my best. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we hope we can overcome these pandemics and we can make the travel arrangements. And we really would like to have you here at the Federal University of Goiás for a few days. I'm sure this will be a very rich, very productive opportunity for our students, but also for our faculty. So once again, thank you very much, Lucas. And I'd like to thank the audience that stayed with us for about 2 hours. Again, this was the first event of our program UFG Doutoral in 2021. So many other things will happen this year. So stay tuned. Everyone, stay healthy. I'm going to say in Portuguese, everyone, todo mundo, fique bem, fique em casa, fique com saúde. And Lucas, I hope you stay well, take care of your health. We are still facing these very challenging times of the pandemic. And once again, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks to all for the good questions. I did my best, but the most of the answers are in your heads. And we have to, I think it's a question of discourse to come up with the best ideas for us, for the school, for doctoral education, for the students. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lucas. Bye, everyone.